Hey everybody, Mr. Maupin coming at you again here. We're taking a look at AP US Government Topic 1.4, focusing in on the Articles of Confederation. I think we're going to probably break this down into two parts. First part is going to be laying some context for, not just, what the Articles of Confederation was in terms of the structure, but the rationale behind creating such a style of government. And then in part two, we're going to be taking a look at the problems and challenges associated with the Articles of Confederation that will ultimately lead to its undoing. So, with that being said, let's get into taking a look at this thing called the Articles of Confederation. Now, we know that the United States is going to declare independence in 1776. But just because we declare independence from England does not mean that we actually have our own independent government just yet. The de facto operating revolutionary government during the war was the Continental Congress, but there was obviously no plan to make that be the permanent government for an independent America. So by 1781, we actually do see the creation of America's first independent government. That is the Articles of Confederation. Now note, you can see the dates there, 1781 to 1787. This shows us that this government does not last very long, and we're going to get into why that is later on. But at least for many historians and those that study political science, it is generally seen as a very good first rough draft or first attempt at independent governing. Now, a lot of the challenges that are going to be associated with the Articles of Confederation government is going to be tied to its structure, the type of government that it's going to be. Now, titles can tell us a lot, and if you take a look at the title of this plan for government, Articles of Confederation, Confederation is a very important term that describes very well what this new kind of government is going to be. A confederation, in reality, is a formal alliance amongst partnering states. That's really what it is. And so what this is going to be is, yes, there's going to be an American government, but this American government really, at the end of the day, is going to be a mutual agreement government, a mutual partnership amongst 13 different independent states. What this creates is a state sovereign supreme government. As we'll go through the details of this Articles of Confederation government is going to be established on purpose, and we'll get to why in a moment. It will be set up on purpose, whereas each individual state will have individual sovereignty rather than the national government unto itself. So to make it very basic, states like North Carolina and New Jersey individually were supreme to the national government at this time. So keep that in mind. And to kind of help you once again understand this concept of confederation or confederacy, when I say confederacy, for some of you, you're thinking, hold on, confederacy, I've heard that before. Wasn't that the Southern rebel government during the Civil War? Yes. And there's a reason that that group used that term confederacy, because in the Civil War, those Southern rebelling states created their own government based on this same type of principle, where it was a mutual alliance of, in that case, Southern states, but with the same idea that their state governments would be supreme over a national government. So a confederacy is a confederacy is a confederacy in terms of what its basic function is. Now that we know what a confederation is, and we know that that's what this first independent government is going to be, then the next question is, well, why? Why create this type of government? Especially with some of the challenges that, many of you will view this and go, well, shouldn't they have noticed that these challenges are going to pop up pretty quick? Well, maybe, but you have to understand the mindset of what this is going into it. And to really understand the mindset of these framers of the Articles of Confederation, you got to go back to how they viewed life as colonists. These folks viewed life as being English colonists as oppressive and tyrannical. And so what they wanted specifically is to create something that is the opposite of that. So if you just think of it from a very basic perspective, if the kind of government they were living under, which had a strong national government, very far away, did not, seem to protect basic rights, a large national army that seemed to be intrusive, yada, yada, yada. If you had that experience already in your life, and you have truly convinced yourself that this is bad, well, logic tells us that the opposite of bad must be good. So if you have already had experience with a bad government that was premised on a strong national government that is far away with an oppressive military and no seeming protection of individual and state rights, well, then you got to do the opposite if you want to make it a good government. And that's the mindset behind the Articles of Confederation. The opposite of bad must be good. And this is the opposite of what was governing under colonial rule. So with that being said, let's get into the deets of this particular framework for government under the Articles of Confederation. Now, when we take a look at this plan for government, we first look at the legislative component of it. You'll notice here that the legislature under the Articles of Confederation is going to be a unicameral legislature, meaning one chamber. That's different than what we know it to be today with Congress, with the House and the Senate as a bicameral body. This is a singular legislature. Now, in this legislature, each state, so there's 13 states, got one vote. So in essence, there are only 13 votes in this entire legislature, with each state getting one vote. Now, think about why it's formed that way. Notice, it's not based on population. If you are a state like Virginia, you have the same amount of votes as, say, Rhode Island. And it emphasizes the notion of equality. Once again, the cornerstone of a confederation. Every state is an equal ally to one another under this new national government. So every state is entitled to equal power, equal voice in this national government. Now, to get any legislation passed in this legislature, you can see you need 9/13 to pass. 9 out of 13. Now note, that is not just a majority. A simple majority would be, in this case, 7 out of 13. But with it being 9 out of 13, we would describe this more as a super majority. You're talking, a little under 3/4 of the states needing to approve any legislation, which means that it's going to be tougher to pass legislation than what we have under our current framework under the Constitution. And note, like so many other parts of this, this is by design. These creators of the Articles of Confederation wanted it hard to create national laws. If the national government's going to be able to do something, the mindset is, by gum, it better be something that has a strong, broad national consensus that seemingly just about everybody wants. And otherwise, then we shouldn't have it. They really wanted it to be challenging and difficult to have national laws. Why? The more national power, the thought is, the easier that national government can tyrannize you. And that's something they certainly did not want to have. So the legislature, unicameral, 9/13 needed to pass legislation. Each state gets one vote. Now, getting to the executive and judicial branches. Well, not much to get to, at least at the national level, because they don't exist. There is no independent presidency like we have under the Constitution. There is no independent federal court system like we have today. It doesn't exist. And once again, it kind of makes sense. If you're afraid of government tyranny, who is the agent that enforces the tyranny, so to speak? Well, that's the executive branch. So what do you do then? What do you do in terms of enforcement of laws and interpreting what laws mean and things like that? Well, that's going to be done at the state level. So there will be state governors. There will be state court systems. But this is a very telling thing. Without a national executive, there's no standard enforcement policy across the states. And without a national judiciary, there's no standard national interpretation of what laws are. So in other words, something that might be interpreted as something in one state might be interpreted differently in another state. Now, it speaks heavily to an emphasis on strong, independent state sovereignty, which they cherished and they held dearly, but it doesn't bode well for gluing these states together very well. Now, in particular, when we talk about limits of the national government, it had no power to levy taxes. It had no ability to pass taxes. Basically, all the national government could do was ask the states for money. They had no power to compel states to pay taxes. Now, this makes sense, going back to colonial days and even to this very day. Americans are very sensitive about taxes. And so they made a very clear point here that for most of these folks, when they think of national government tyranny, they think of the power of taxation. So don't let the national government have that power. Now, that makes sense. It promotes freedom, it keeps the government out of your pocket, and that's all great stuff. And no, it doesn't mean that taxes don't exist at all. There's, state taxes that are approved by the various state legislatures. And that's not to say that the national government didn't have any money to operate with per se, but it could only operate with funds that are in essence donated to them by the various states. You're basically creating a pass-the-hat funding system for your national government. And what is that going to do to the power of your national government? It's going to make it very weak, which is by design. So hopefully you understand this is all designed to keep the national government weak. A weak national government is a government that can't tyrannize you. That's what's the idea behind it. It also includes no power at the national level to regulate interstate commerce. So any laws dealing with regulating trade, that's all done on a state-by-state basis. Once again, you're preserving state freedom. You're keeping a national government from encroaching on how states individually want to deal with business matters. It also provided no specific amending process to this framework for government. And that's important, which means that if you wanted to change this government in any way, like let's say, for example, you did want to give the national government the ability to levy taxes, well, that would be a change to the governing structure there, and would therefore require in reality all 13 states to approve something to make that happen. Now, 9 out of 13 is tough enough. I mean, imagine you got 13 people and you're told, okay, well, 9 of us have to agree on what we want to have for lunch. That's going to be very tough to begin with. But to amend this framework for government and you're told you got to have all 13 people in that group to agree on where to go for lunch, that's virtually impossible. And that's what's going to happen here. And once again, it's by design, making it virtually impossible for this national government to get any bigger, to get any stronger. It's going to be intentionally stunted to keep it from being tyrannical. And, basically, the way this is going to operate at the end of the day is that any powers the national government does not explicitly have, which is very few, very little, not much there at all, really, everything else is retained at the state level, which is what they wanted. These are folks that are very, very, very protective of their individual state identities, their states' rights. They want government close to home. They want government that is much more approachable for the average citizen, and they believe that this is the kind of government that's going to make that happen. It's clearly a reaction to the trauma of the days of colonialism. So that's what's going to be created in the Articles. Makes sense. There's some logic behind it. Many of you in here might agree with maybe some type of government like this today. But as we will learn next time, there's going to be some major challenges that result from this framework for government, despite its best of intentions. And we'll get to those challenges and what's going to lead to the ultimate failure of the Articles of Confederation next time. Okay? And we'll see you then. Bye-bye.